we do expect that there will be time at the end of the presentation for some more open question answer session, which we can stop the recording before moving into that open question answer session.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So sorry about that. So welcome to our class, Rise of the Roxstars, a case study in local group participation and retention. We will be describing methods that we have used for the Shire of Roxbury Mill in Atlantia. And just to give a bit of a biography, so you know who we are, I'm Nyvein Ravadam, and modernly I'm a program manager. I'm a VP on my synagogue board. So this is not the only place where I have done various volunteering leadership type work. In the SCA, I do have GOA awards, and the most notable thing, at least for this class, is I'm the prior seneschal of Roxbury Mill. I was seneschal for 4 years, although I've also been ARMIC, event steward, and a feastocrat, such that I've had a wide breadth of experience across the SCA.
And hello, I am Ishmael Steadfast Reed. I am a 10-year public educator, so I have a lot of experience working with large groups of people. And I'm also a union organizer for our local educators union. So that experience, like Nyvein said, is coming in handy in this organization as well. In the SCA, I am a Laurel. I have GOA awards in both service and rapier as well. I am the current seneschal of Roxbury Mill. I have been for the last 4 years approximately. And I have rapier marshal in charge experience, event steward experience. So we've done a little of everything.
So I do have this slide in here is dedicated to all the rock stars. So this is a class that we are talking about what Ishmael and I have done as seneschal, but really there is a lot of it that cannot be done without more members of a group participating. And I want to make sure that as this class gets some more publicity, that we and they are aware that everyone helped with this.
Mm-hmm.
So to begin with, I want to highlight the population of our group over time. This is, someone asked, where is Roxbury Mill in the modern world? We are on the East Coast around the DC area, which has a very high density of Scadians in general. And we are a shire in that area. And one of the things that this graph can show you is how we started out. So when I first became seneschal, we had a very low group population. And using tactics that we'll be talking about in this presentation, our group population skyrocketed pretty much. But over the pandemic, it did drop, but then it came back. And that part is pretty important because the first lesson that we want to share is that groups do cycle in size and activity level over time. And that it is not really realistic to expect that your group is going to just grow in size and then stay at this really high population number. However, it is something that you want your group to be healthy, and that you want your group to cycle in size within a certain population zone, rather than at our, say, 10-person population where we started. One of the other things to note is that our officer and deputy roles, as compared to the total number of people in the group, stayed at a fairly consistent ratio. So in order to have a healthy group, you really want officers not to be the bulk of your population. So when we were a smaller group, the officers were the bulk of the population. As we got to be a larger group, the officers and the officer to general population ratio tended to stay consistent while still having a high number of officers. We had a consistent ratio there. So we had a larger pool of people to pull from in order for new people to step up as officers.
And while we're giving this kind of snapshot of the Shire of Roxbury Mill for all of you to understand kind of what the group looks like as we move forward talking about techniques and strategies. We don't just want to talk about the quantity of members that we have actively playing in our group, but also kind of the quality of that participation. So the Shire of Roxbury Mill is very widely engaged in both local and kingdom level events. It is very regular at most regional and kingdom level events for us to bring out a day shade space, like a canvas space for our local group. We'll have, a dozen or 16 people at our larger events participating under that day shade. There'll be a day board for our members, and then members will disperse and go do all different kinds of activities, come back and hang out. We enter competitions that are team competitions, generally with a Roxbury Mill team. The best example I can give is Revenge of the Stitch here in Atlantia. It's like a 24-hour sewing competition. I think a couple kingdoms may have something similar. We enter a team from our local group. And then also there's that name and heraldry recognition here in Atlantia. This mill cross, the kind of curvy looking cross you see on the banner, is our badge, and it is very, very recognizable in our kingdom to a point where somebody who's new to our group may go to an event, and somebody may take a look at their flash, their favor from the Shire of Roxbury Mill, and say, "Oh, you're from Roxbury Mill. I know you. I know those people." That goes a long way. Shire members here encompass a wide range of SCA leadership positions as well. We have held kingdom notable positions like our kingdom bard, our kingdom poet, various kinds of champions over the course of the last 10 years or so, as well as regional officer positions, worked in kingdom retinue. We're kind of everywhere. So one point that we want to make about all of these people and what they're doing before we move into recruitment and retention is to make sure to point out that this large group, everyone is not participating at the same level. We have a widely diverse range of participation, from those people who may only come, once a quarter or once a month, those people who may come to our local practices but maybe not participate as an officer, all the way up through, those people we mentioned before, taking on those leadership positions. So this is an engagement pyramid. It was made by Gideon Rosenblatt in his book, Engagement Pyramid, 6 Levels of Connecting People and Social Change. And this pyramid is used in other kinds of social organizing, either social justice movements, political movements, volunteer organizations can use an engagement pyramid like this. And we want to make sure to point out that it is very much a pyramid. There's going to be a lot of people further to the bottom, but the lesson that we learned, especially based on that previous slide about our population, is that a large, diverse group of people is much more resilient than a small, experienced one. This is something we see all the time in the SCA. You may have a local group that has 10 or 12 members who all know each other really well, and maybe each person is trying to do something to keep the group going. That group is working really, really hard, but they aren't particularly resilient to external forces or change. A large group with a diverse level of participation is going to be able to weather those changes, weather setbacks, whether a particular officer may be needing to leave or step out suddenly. And so we really want to make sure to stress that even if everyone is not participating at the same level and you observe that, don't be worried, because that large, diverse level of participation is going to make your group very resilient. All right, and so with all that being said, kind of an introduction to our group, we're ready for section 1. So the SCA is a game. A lot of people talk about playing in the SCA. This organization is a game. It is a volunteer organization. It's a nonprofit, yes, but it is also a game. And so in the first section of our presentation, we'd like to use some studies on game theory and particularly game participation to try and understand why people come to the SCA to play with us, and also how we might make sure that those people are playing the game together and can be kind of recruited in a healthy, sustainable way. So we'll be referring to some game theory throughout the first section.
One thing to remember also as we are going through how people relate to the SCA and how they participate in the SCA is that the SCA can be unique in that folks tend to forget sometimes, and people are bringing their outside experiences with them into this game. That in other organizations, that tends to be utilized pretty strongly. In the SCA, it tends to be disregarded a lot more. But that is something to keep in mind on small scales and sometimes larger scales, like who might be a useful person to ask to be an officer. But in terms of a small scale, this picture is up because it was an instance of utilizing outside experiences to make playing in the SCA more fun. So in Atlantia, we have things called prize fights and rapier, where when an individual reaches the next level of rapier, we'll do a little portion of the event will be dedicated towards individuals fighting them one-on-one. But sometimes those folks have friends who are either not rapier fighters, or in this image, you can see myself on the right in the blue. And I was working other areas of the event that day, so I was not fighting. And what we did instead of having a rapier fight then was we had a knot tying contest. And the man on the left, Niccolo, is very much into all types of candy crafts or Boy Scout crafts, and knot tying is one of a really big thing for him. So we had a knot tying competition rather than a rapier competition. And this is not something that he does really in the SCA, but it is something that is applicable and could be used in an SCA context to make this prize fight more fun, because then I could challenge him even though I was not actually fighting rapier that day. So it made this activity more accessible to a wider range of individuals. I was not the only one who stepped in who is not fighting, because Niccolo also has friends who wanted to congratulate him and who wanted to participate with him who were not fighters. So this is something that is just good to keep in mind, that can be used in small ways and large ways, that you can think outside of the SCA box sometimes, and you can utilize going into kind of what you know from modern day to make the SCA more fun and more accessible.
All right, so with that being said, here is some of the kind of fundamental research that we're going to be using to interpret some recruitment strategies that have really, really worked for our Shire. So this is a group called Quantic Foundry who conducted this research. They are normally working with gaming, video gaming, board gaming, tabletop gaming, etc. And they do like wide scale research about gaming. And they conducted this study where they surveyed something like 100,000 different players across different countries, different age groups, and all different kinds of demographics. And the results of that survey were that they found these different motivations for playing. They were surveying gamers about their motivations for why they play. And they found these different kinds of motivations: discovery, power, competition, fantasy, completion or challenge. And ultimately, they, Quantic Foundry, summarized these motivations into three kind of high-level clusters, which you can see here on the screen. It's kind of a yellow cluster around story, design, and fantasy, a blue cluster of motivations around completion and challenge and power, and a red cluster around community, excitement, competition, that kind of thing. So we're going to be moving forward through this presentation using these three high-level clusters. We're calling the yellow cluster, in our purposes, immersion, the immersion cluster. This is one motivation why people choose to play games like the SCA. The blue cluster we're calling our mastery cluster is another reason why people like to play. And then finally, the red cluster we're calling our social cluster. And there are bridges between them, as you'll see a little bit later on. You can't quite neatly put somebody in one category 100%, 100%, but it is really useful to try to start to look at your members and understand what are they looking for to get out of the organization.
And as Ishmael just said, it is very difficult to put individuals precisely in one of those categories. And on the whole, everyone is going to have a mixture of those categories. But it is important to keep in mind that most people are going to have one primary kind of, let's call it a personality trait, or I'm blanking on the word there. Anyway, one primary rationale for why they're playing the game. So we have fake people here. We've got Jordan, who is primarily an immersion player, but also likes to play in the mastery role and a little bit of a social player. We have Alex, who is almost entirely a social player, but has a little bit of that mastery desire also. Sam, who is mostly a mastery player, but has a little bit of social and immersion. And then Sydney at the bottom, who is almost entirely just that trifecta of both social, or all of the social mastery and immersion being maybe slightly less than the others, but pretty much that entire spectrum. And that is something to definitely keep in mind, because we don't want to fall into the trap of just putting people distinctly into these boxes and saying this is the only thing that they care about. Individuals will care about multiple things across the game, but they will be more likely to fall into one of the primary roles more than others.
Right. I wanted to add that you all here in the audience might take a moment to think about players, members, people that you know in the SCA who might sound like a Jordan, or sound like an Alex, or sound like a Sam or a Sydney. You can imagine Jordan being mostly immersion with a little bit of mastery and social. This might be that player who cares a lot about maintaining a period appearance, such that they like to get very good at sewing in order to maintain that immersion, right? So they are a mastery player. They want to do well. They want to sew very well, but they're kind of big rationales. They want to have that immersive experience. You might know somebody like that. So maybe take a moment and think, do I know people who I might put into some of these combinations? Thanks, Nyvein.
So we are going to give you some likes, dislikes, and action items that you can take back to your chapters to help encourage the different players to play in your group. And we want to point out both things that they like, they dislike, and then very practical things that you can do with your group. So starting off with the social player. These are the folks who really like conversation and hanging out with friends. They go to events and they'll sit under the day shade, or maybe they have found that being an MOL is a really good place for them. Not every kingdom has MOLs, ministers of the lists, but they will find maybe that activity where they're helping out, they're participating. Maybe they like working at gate, so they can chat with people who they're sitting with, but they're also helping out in that situation. The social player is someone who you really want to connect with as a modern person. In a lot of cases, they will have a veneer of a persona because that is how the game is played, but they really want to connect with you as a person, as a friend, and in a lot of times as just kind of themselves, that they don't split off the game from themselves as cleanly. Things that the social player tends to dislike, especially when they are coming into your group as a new person. They don't want to be told all of the information all at once. And they don't want to be told all of the nitty-gritty historical or the very specific ways that you can be involved or how to do things extremely right in the SCA. They tend to dislike info dumps. as lectures, basically. They also tend to dislike when they go to an event a packed activity schedule, which means they have less time to socialize and less time to hang out with their friends. That they are less likely to be as involved in each of the activities that is happening. So if the schedule is too closely packed, then they are not getting out of the event the things that they want from the event. So having a little more time where they can socialize and where socializing is okay, where it is on the schedule, that is really important for the social player. Another thing that they very much tend to dislike is too much emphasis on in-game hierarchy. Because as we noted in that likes category, the social player has a very strong sense of themselves as a modern person. So when you emphasize that in-game hierarchy too strongly, it turns them off. It puts them off from playing as much in a game because they see it as fake. And they see it just as rules that they don't see a reason for. So too much emphasis on endgame hierarchy tends to put them off. Not that they dislike the hierarchy overall, especially when you end up with, or especially when you have folks who have, not just that social emphasis in their personality, but basically interacting with a hierarchy as if it is as strong as a modern hierarchy in like their job environment. That is something that would put them off. But the things that you can do to engage a social player, to bring them into your group, whether they are newer folks or whether they are folks who've been around for a while. One of the big things is dinner after practice. Again, the social player really likes socializing. So if you have a fighter practice or an A&S activity that tends to not have a lot of conversation time, not a lot of hanging out time. And I don't mean conversation or hanging out like how people will just hang out around the edges and chat. I mean, again, we're talking about that scheduled time for folks to hang out, then going out for dinner or lunch or what have you after that practice or after that activity is a good draw for the social player. In addition, populist meetings that include social time is also a really big thing. You don't want to just show up to a meeting, have the meeting, and then leave. Encouraging that social time, for instance, like having a potluck before the meeting, tends to draw in the social players. And a third really important item is having a good day shade experience. So if this individual shows up to your events and will hang out under your group's day shade, and there is nothing for them to do, and there is no one for them to talk to, that everyone is somewhere else, then they're going to be bored and they won't have gotten out of the event what they want, and they might not come back. So having other folks under the day shade, making sure that there are things for them to do, like we've talked about before, all that coalesces into them having a good day shade experience. So they don't just show up to this tent where folks have dropped all their gear and then hightailed it somewhere else, and then they're lonely. So making sure that there is someone else there so that they are not the only one. Another thing that they really like is activities versus just tracks at events. So a track would be something like rapier fighting or armored fighting happening at an event. It is something that you have to practice ahead of time, that you have to be authorized in order to participate in the event. Something that you have to do external from the event in order to get enjoyment out of at the event would be a track. Bringing in A&S competitions where you have to have worked on something ahead of time. And those are all tracks. Activities, on the other hand, is something like a scavenger hunt, which is often put together for kids, but could be expanded for new folks and kids, and a lot of social players would get enjoyment out of. Thrown weapons actually tends to be really, really good for social players because you do not have to have done it outside of an event, and frequently it's something that doesn't happen as often outside of events. So it's novelty, it's new, and you get a bunch of folks being able to just show up to an event and try it. That type of activity is very good for a social player. Having like a newcomer's tea in the A&S tent. That is also something that is a good activity because you don't have to have done something outside of the event.
Yep. And we've done every one of these action items at one point or another as a Shire. You don't do all of them all the time, right? That would be unrealistic. But one example I can give of this activities versus tracks, because I think Nyvein's point is really strong, is at our most recent event that our Shire held, we had a series of like kind of classes, outdoor kinds of classes that didn't lend themselves to universities, but they didn't have anything to do with and a potential award. There was no competition, so we did wheat weaving for people to make little favors. We did indigo dyeing. We did some cooking over a fire as a class where people could try it. And these collections of activities were social hubs over the course of the event, because it removes some of, like she said, some of that expectation to have prepared and to watch and be evaluated.
And I do want to encourage also scavenger hunts as an activity for newcomers. That is also something that we have done in the past. I mentioned it under my examples, but a scavenger hunt tends to be thought of as an activity for kids, but it is a really good activity for newcomers because you can put things like acronyms and heraldry on your scavenger hunt, and suddenly newcomers are walking around looking at those things and knowing that they have a connection to the wider SCA as a whole, and having fun. They can pair up and they can wander around in groups, getting the answers to the scavenger hunt. Originally, it was something we had created for kids, and then we found that adults, especially newcomer adults, were also participating in the scavenger hunts. So it got reworked to specifically have things that were also adult friendly. But moving on.
Yep. All right. So our second major kind of motivation is the mastery player. Just like I'm sure that some of you thought about somebody who you know, and maybe it's you, who is a social player, you probably know somebody who's a mastery player primarily as well. Mastery players like to learn by doing. These are those people that want to jump in and try the activity. They really like having challenges and goals. They will come to a fighter practice weekly in order to train and practice and get feedback and get better. They will constantly practice their art. And they also like having a really clear path of learning and progression. This is one thing that is a mixed bag for the SCA. On the one hand, we have really clear kind of award trajectories for different kinds of activities that indicate kind of your path of growth, which is good. People who are mastery players like this kind of thing. On the downside, to get to dislikes, being told keep doing what you're doing. So talking about that award structure, what we do really well, we have a really clear path of beginner to mastery. On the downside, we tend to not be very good about providing good, consistent, clear feedback about what that actually looks like. And that's one thing that will turn off your mastery player. Because if they can't get better and they don't know how they're supposed to get better, then they're like, why do I even bother? They dislike distractions during competitions. This is something that's come up a couple times where there'll be some kind of social activity or maybe a pop-up court in the middle of like a tournament. These people might have worked really hard to get into a kind of tournament mindset and can be really disconcerted by that break for the kind of SCA theater to unfold. Like I said before, being told to keep doing what you're doing. When you have a mastery player in your group, it's really important that you understand that unlike maybe somebody who is really averse to feedback or might be really upset by it, this mastery player wants to know what to do better. This is something that's really important to them. And finally, villainizing awards as motivation. This is something that comes up all the time in the SCA. The kind of demeaning phrase of like doing something for the cookie or what have you. For a mastery player, awards are their external objective. It's a game objective. And so we're playing a game, and the idea of villainizing me or saying that I'm playing this game for the wrong reason can really be off-putting. In any other kind of game, in a video game, you would reward somebody who was going for every single achievement in the game, right? In a board game, you would not villainize somebody who was going for a high score over the course of the game or something like that. So we don't want to do the same thing here. There are a couple of action items that are things you can start to incorporate to help those mastery players feel like they're getting what they need out of the game. The first thing is include some rigorous competition at events. Every event, every activity, I guess I should say, does not have to be a intense best of one versus one single elimination tournament. You know, every activity does not need to be a intensely judged by a panel of 3 laurels arts and sciences competition with a deep rubric. But at least one activity should be, because there are people who will go for that. I know that there's somebody here in Atlantia who recently said to me, like, the thing that I want to do is find out where interesting competitions are, make something to meet that competition, and go and compete. And that's like the thing that they want to do in the arts to have fun. So we also want to make sure that there's time for structured learning for these mastery players. Lessons and classes are great for this. This is something that the arts and sciences world tends to do quite well, and that the martial arts have a bit of a mixed bag currently in the SCA. Some classes, like specifically meant for teaching and learning, kind of intermingled with the kind of open sparring with feedback sessions. And then finally, we really want to make sure that we're articulating paths for advancement. It needs to be really clear how you get to the end goal. There can be kind of a mystique around the receiving of awards or the way pollings work. And for a mastery player, you know, you may very well want to have a conversation with them. Here is how polling orders work, even though you're not currently in one yet, maybe, or maybe they are. This is what you can expect, how like the relationship between your achievement and your receiving of the awards. And those two things are not quite as one-to-one as I think a lot of people initially think, right? There's a lot of gray area that happens between the polling and who winds up in a polling, how that feedback is used, where that feedback goes, how it's measured. So that's really good to explain to these mastery players. And finally, our immersion player. So the immersion player, again, you all know somebody who is like this. Their focus in the SCA is on the history and research of their chosen persona or time period. And they love the aesthetic and the pageantry of recreation. These are those people that you could easily imagine spending some of their time in like a dedicated historical recreation group for that time period. This is that person that insists on having exactly the right cup for their class and decade and the country, you know. There are some things that these people dislike. The pressure to compete is one of them that comes up. When we try to fit everybody in the same SCA box, these kinds of players will quickly become disinterested. There's somebody in our local group who does an incredibly specific and incredibly detailed persona for a little known time and place. And one thing that she says again and again is that I'm not interested in competing with anybody else. I'm doing this interesting work that's interesting to me. Why would I pit myself against anybody? So we make sure to encourage all of that research and all of those things that she does without pressuring her to compete in order to maybe receive accolades or be noticed, that kind of thing. So something else that these immersion players really dislike is obtrusive modernity. These are, this can be any kind of thing from maybe, a chain link fence in the background of your event site, to, not covering gear on the martial list field, covering kind of modern gear with a blanket or a cloak or something like that. Obviously, as you all might already be noticing, there are some things between these kinds of players that are mutually exclusive. Like one activity might not actually be able to meet the needs of every single kind of player. That is okay. That is by design. That's why the SCA is so diverse. And so it's just important basically to create opportunities for each of these three kinds of people. So before you feel like we may have offered you something impossible to do. Here are some action items, things that you can do to really help this immersion player stick around and have a great time. Create opportunities for historical accuracy, something in the SCA, Enchanted Ground, where there's either a period of time or a section of the event where the focus is on trying to maintain as period accurate a presence as possible, removing everything modern. These people like that kind of thing. I think one event that we have here in Atlantia, the Persona Pentathlon, is a great opportunity for this kind of player, where basically you have to enter 5 different items into an ANS competition for immersion players who also like to compete, that is. You have to enter 5 different items that all would belong to the same persona, basically, which is an interesting opportunity for them. Create themed events or activities. This is something that we see sometimes, where an event will have a theme around a specific time or place. It's a great opportunity for the immersion player to kind of meet that theme. Good question. I'll answer that in just a moment, I think. Jessamine asks. I'll say it out loud for everyone in a moment. Supporting persona creation is really important for this person. Initially, we can be prone to kind of dismiss, oh, well, like, pick a name, like when you can. But these kind of people, if you find them in your group, they like to dig deep. They want to know exactly what kind of name they might have, what kind of heraldry they might have. That kind of the fantasizing of this imaginary person is really interesting. They're your role player. Everyone who's ever played Dungeons and Dragons knows this person. And finally, encourage opportunities for universities and learning is a great thing to do. Make sure that you encourage your folks to go to university. Maybe in your populace meeting, ask, hey, is anybody going to university? Is anybody teaching a class there? Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm answering questions in the chat.
No, thank you. That's good. Yeah. So to make sure that the recording captures some of these questions, somebody mentioned that there are people who have been playing in the SCA for a long time, from the 70s and 80s, who don't like the term game in reference to the SCA, and they also don't like the kind of play for the cookie goal. Noticing that kind of person is out there. And Nyvein's response was that, like, we chose game as our framework because it's there's a lot of research that has been done in gaming to understand motivations and why people choose something as like a hobby activity. And so we can use that as a framework. But yes, obviously for people who feel like that is a demeaning term or are kind of dismissive of the effort and volunteerism, don't treat it as the only thing that the SCA is. So there's another interesting comment that I'll say before we close out section 1. Over time, I feel like my kind of type has changed. I'm more of an immersion player now than when I started playing. Do you find that others change or flow between types? Nyvein, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I would say yes, that is a common type of change that people can find happens, but it is very much similar to just how individuals change over time in their daily life, right? So some people are going to stay in one player type versus another because that is a very strong aspect of their personality and how they view the world as a whole. Other folks, especially if you started out with having kind of more of like one type especially if you started out having less distinction between the styles that you play in, you can find that, oh, actually right now I really enjoy this type of playing. Or as an example, I have actually moved slightly farther away from the specific historical aspect for myself, that I really enjoy learning about it from other folks. But this movement for me, moving away from the historicity for, say, my clothing, has simply been due to time in my life and what I have, the time and the free time that I have available in order to play in the SCA. And so you will have those external influences impacting how you play in the SCA. And sometimes you're moving from one type of player more to another because you find that more interesting. Sometimes you're moving in that direction just simply due to external influences and what you have time for in order to play in the SCA.
Yep. Same thing here. I think it's pretty common for people's motivations to change ever so slightly as they play. Um, I started out primarily as a mastery player. Actually, on the rapier field, I wanted to get good, basically. And then as I started participating in the organization, it became a good social outlet. I started caring a lot about the late 16th century as a time period to make sure that my clothing matched what I was wearing, fighting on the field in a 16th century style. And so, 6 years later, I find myself to be quite an immersion player, despite the fact that I started out mostly caring about the kind of combat sport element.
And I think that's a really good movement to our section 1 takeaway slide, Ishmael.
Yeah, so in summary, one, diagnose where different members' bars are. Over the course of their participation, it's a great chance to just observe, okay, that thing really spoke to them, or this person tends not to participate in these kinds of activities. That's a great way to start diagnosing kind of what everyone's strengths are, where they like to play. We are strongly recommending using fading support strategy for newcomers. So all the shadowlanes here in the group. Match newcomers with a buddy, somebody who maybe you think might match their play style. Importantly, not necessarily somebody in the same activity as them, although that helps, but somebody who might match their play style. Hey, I really think you should meet this person. I think you guys are gonna really hit it off. But that fading support model means sticking with new people longer than one event. Some shadowlanes do a really great job of finding those new people and getting them to their first event, and then kind of letting them go, right? Go have fun. We're recommending to guide them more at the beginning, but to just fade out your support of that newcomer over their first 6 months to a year. One thing that our shadowlane does pretty well right now is anybody who's been playing with us for a year or maybe a little bit less, she will reach out to them when we're going to an event, kind of one-on-one, and say like, hey, we're going to this event. If you're coming, here's where you can find us. And just like checking in with them over the course of the event as well, right? Seeing what they're doing. Those kinds of things are really useful to make sure that this person doesn't kind of drop out because they're feeling unsupported. And finally, a section 1 takeaway: ensure that your events include aspects for each personality type. When you are throwing an event, when you are having an activity in your local group, ask yourself, is there something for social people to do? Is there something for mastery people to do? Is there something for immersion people to do? And if you can say yes to those 3, you're probably going to see that people come away from the activity having had a good time and wanting to do it again.
So this is our end of section 1. And if there are any questions that have not been dropped in the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand to ask a question, this class is still being recorded. We would be happy to answer questions about section 1 before we move on to section 2. I'm seeing one question that does not look like it looks like a comment in the chat about changing approaches to the SCA. And yes, it's important that you encourage different approaches to the SCA, because different people will have very strong feelings about the different ways that they interact in the SCA. As we heard earlier, that there are some folks who've been in the SCA for quite a while who really dislike the SCA as called a game, but then you might have newcomers coming in who really like that aspect of it. So being aware that people can have very, very strong feelings about how and why they're playing or interacting in the SCA, and trying to encourage the ability for everyone to notice that that it's okay to have a different perspective on why you're here and why you're in this group.
Right. Yeah. Like that. Somebody mentioned earlier that that it is like a very big tent. This organization. There are some people who treat it largely as a social club. There are some people who treat it largely as a historical recreation. There are some people who treat it as a volunteer organization. There are some people who treat it as like a training tool. So you're never going to be able to argue everyone to think about this organization in the exact same way. The most important thing we can do is make sure that there are opportunities for all those kinds of people to get what they need, basically.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. We'll be moving on to section 2. So section 2 is systemic solutions for retention. So we will be talking about the game metaphor a bit less in this section, but mostly talking about retention as it relates to how you interact with your members in your chapter. And one thing to note that comes up fairly frequently is, why are we now talking about recruitment? That isn't a lot of what we just mentioned, something that is very important for recruiting new individuals. And the answer is yes. And actually, some of the things that we'll be talking about in the upcoming slides do dovetail with recruitment, or basically are recruitment. That recruitment and retention is a sliding scale, that it is not necessarily, oh, here is recruitment and here is retention. Sometimes you can piece it apart, like communications out on a website or going to a demo. But one thing to note, and one thing that we have found to be true, is that you're getting people walking in your door all of the time. So instead of saying, how do we get more people in the door? You want to say, how do we get the people who walk in the door to want to stay? And if you start implementing some changes and note that, oh, hey, you're getting more people, it's not necessarily that you have done recruitment better. It can be that you are actually retaining those people who walked in the door. And it is really important to notice if you are getting people who are walking in the door and then leaving, because that means that they found you and they know how to find your group. But the part that is not sticking is them staying. So once they walk in your door, are they staying? Are they not staying? And why? And that kind of interaction is some of the things that we'll be talking about in the later slides, and helps with your holistic group model overall, because also if you have newcomers sticking, then you are also likely to have oldcomers sticking as well, right? That instead of folks fading out over time, that it means you are hosting a group that is has something for everyone, and that has a reason for everyone at varying levels to stick around. So we're back to our engagement pyramid. And as we noted earlier, that it really is a pyramid, that you have individuals on the bottom and at the top, but there are only so many leaders and there are only so many leadership positions that in any group that you have, and you will always have more people at the bottom level of the pyramid. But the lesson that we want to share for this slide is that individuals move up and down the pyramid over time. So having folks only moving up, say they walk in, they're a newcomer, and then they slowly move up, they're a deputy, they're an officer in your group, well, they have to be able to step back and also move down. So I am the previous seneschal for Roxbury Mill, and currently I have no officer position in my shire. And that is something that is really important, because it gives me a chance to breathe, and it gives me a chance to do other things and to take a step back. Seneschal for 4 years was a very big job and took a lot of my time. And if I did not have the ability to step back and to breathe, I might not be in the SCA at all, because that would be a lot of commitment that is required of me. So instead of burning out, I'm now participating at a lower level in this pyramid. However, because I'm still participating and I have experience and I've been here, I am sure that I will move back up that pyramid at some point and participate in a stronger manner in the group. Something to keep in mind also as we move through the next slides, we'll be talking about each of the levels individually. And we have at the top here, that came with the engagement pyramid, a question about actions. What observable actions can you track at each level of engagement? That is something that we will be talking about on slides, but it's also good for you to think about of what actions can you track from individuals and towards individuals. And communication on the other side, what do people need from your organization to stay engaged at each level or to move up? What do they need to know from you? What do you need to make sure you are communicating to the people in your group or the folks who are looking at your group from the outside? So our first level goes from observing to following. So this is specifically that recruitment area that you don't necessarily need explicit recruitment in order to gain individuals walking into your door, or sorry, walking through your door. So one thing that is really important is to include updated information on websites. This is so important. Including updated information on websites and doing your darndest to make sure that the website looks modern. This is especially important for younger folks. And this is something that many organizations are dealing with, but making sure you have a website that is clean, is clear, and is mobile friendly is so, so important. And then having updated information there. Because unlike social media, unlike even Discord, which a lot of younger folks are moving towards, information on a website is static. And it can live there and it can be updated by the officers so that it is relevant to the time, but you don't have to dig for it in the same way. And making sure that information is available in a way that you do not have to dig for is really important. Including schedules of activities far in advance. People want to plan out their life. They don't want to wonder what they're doing next week. And they're more likely to show up to something if they know what will be happening. And also including class schedules and instructions for various activities ahead of time on the website is, again, very important because we're all busy. And you want to make sure that especially somebody who has not been participating as strongly, right? Especially someone at the bottom level of the pyramid who is just looking at your website, give them a reason to walk in your door. Give them a reason to show up. If you just say, we'll be having an A&S class, they don't have a reason. They don't know what that means. If they are just a newcomer or maybe they're just participating occasionally, they don't know what that is. Include things that explain it to them. Additionally, in terms of social media, encourage an active social media. It doesn't have to be all the time every day, but decently active social media that includes pictures of events. Hey, folks who are just looking at our website. Hey, folks who just showed up to our Facebook page and have been lurking on the edges, trying to figure out if you really want to come to something. This is the cool things that we're doing. This is the interesting things that you can find here if you come to our group. And also use it as a group coordination tool. So who's going to this event? Who's bringing, XYZ? Are we doing a day board at the event? That is the type of thing that lurkers in your social media page are going to see as, a bunch of people are going to that event. Maybe I want to check it out too. Oh, look, there'll be food there. I don't have to worry about how do I pack a lunch for an SCA event. I can just bring something to share. That's an important coordination tool for your members, but also for those lurkers on the edges who are just kind of looking at your website and social media. Our next point is that one-on-one conversations really bring people in the door. This is one of the most common ways to get new members, is that you talk to them individually as a person. So welcome walk-ins and curious passerby into events or practices. One of the worst experiences that I had was I was at an SCA event, and I was there for other reasons. It was fairly small, or I was participating right at the SCA event. It was a fairly small event in a shared environment, and a number of non-Scadians walked by and asked the folks sitting at the gate, "Oh, what's happening in there?" And the answer that the folks at gate gave those individuals was that, "Oh, it's a private event." That was it. "Oh, it's a private event." And then so they left. That was the end. There was no curiosity left. Rather than saying, "Oh, this is what we do. This is what we have here. Would you like to walk around? Let me find someone who can show you around the event." They're told this is a private event. So welcome walk-ins, welcome curious passerby. One of the things that the Shire does really well is that if we see somebody kind of hovering on the edges in a space, we have our practices in shared spaces, especially during the pandemic, we're outdoors. We see someone kind of hanging out on the side, kind of watching. Someone will stop what they're doing, walk over to that person and say, "Oh, hey, this is who we are. Would you like to come in?" And a lot of times they don't. They don't want to come in. They just kind of want to watch, and that is okay. You don't have to push them to come in either. What you've done is you've had a positive interaction, a second point, or positive interaction with that individual. And maybe next time they walk by, they will come in the second time. Being too pushy is a turnoff, but just being mildly encouraging is a really good opportunity. Another thing about positive reinforcement is, especially if you are somewhere like a Ren Fair, but this also happens at practices when folks are not somewhere to Ren Fair, sorry. If you are somewhere at a demo, or you have a booth in a fair somewhere, not at a Ren Fair, then folks will walk by and say, "Oh, are you like the Renaissance Fair?" The worst answer you can give to that is no. We are not the Renaissance Fair. However, that is a point of comparison that those individuals know about. And that is something that they can use, that they are excited about. They know about the Renaissance Fair. They like the Renaissance Fair. So you can say, "Have you been to the Renaissance Fair? We're like those people who do it all year round." And then they'll learn that, okay, we have, more historical, we don't have spectators in the same way that a Renaissance Fair has. But saying no cuts that conversation short, and they just leave. It's like improv, the yes and game. You don't want to say no to someone who is curious, who is walking by. You want to say yes and rather than no. And the last point that we have for moving folks from this observing to following stage of membership is having structured meetings. So having structured meetings in person, make sure that you have a plan, that if someone shows up to your meeting and they've never been there before, that it's not just a whole bunch of chaos happening, that you have an agenda, that you're following that agenda, that you don't have interruptions and side conversations happening all the time at your meetings. Nobody really likes that, but it's an extreme turnoff for new folks because you look disorganized and you look like you don't know what you're doing. Having structured meetings where you follow the agenda and having then a separate social time makes it much easier for new folks coming in. And especially posting the agenda and meeting minutes, again, either on your website and or on your social media page, makes it really easy for those lurkers to say, "Oh, this is what's been going on." You draw people in who don't have the time, don't have the interest yet, or don't have the current ability to interact on the same level. You are making it possible for them to interact and continue to stay interacting with your group, even at this minimum level. So our lesson number 5 is, if you want people to show up, make it easy for them.
Yeah, and I want to add one or two things to what Nyvein said on that one. First, that as somebody who works in organizing as my full-time job right now, this is some of these things that Nyvein is mentioning are like specific training tools provided to people like volunteer organizers, union organizers, social justice organizers, things like having those one-on-one conversations, be positive, even if you don't get that commitment of volunteerism. Um, the person doesn't have to say, yes, I'm going to come in this moment, because like Nyvein said, they may come back. It's the same in all other kinds of like volunteer organizing. So, you know, rest assured that these are like tried and true methods from a bunch of different places. Those one-on-one conversations are also going to happen for most of your members in their workplace, in their neighborhoods, within their friendships. Those social connections are largely how people arrive. So when Nyvein and I are talking about bringing people in the door, it's a metaphorical door. We're not literally saying people who walk by, although that does happen sometimes, like she said. It could be any of those conversations that people have about this hobby in their daily lives. I also want to mention that somebody in the chat asked a good, somebody asked a good question in the chat that I think we should just say for purposes of the recording. The summary was basically that they were hosting a more kind of newcomer friendly or more socially friendly activity during their regular kind of activity schedule during the week. And some mastery heavy players were kind of upset that the activity didn't really seem to be for them. They're like, well, I want to participate, but I don't really get what the point is. And I think that it's important to reiterate that as long as there is something for everyone, everything doesn't have to be for everyone. We have at our local practice both arts and sciences and martial arts happening in the same physical location. And that was a real point of contention for some of our really hardcore mastery players, because they felt like it took away from their mastery of like practicing one thing in a dedicated way. And we stuck to our guns on it because it was better for the overall group. And that person or these people might still be kind of sore about that. Like that is not the decision that they would have wanted us to make. But we made it and we stuck by it because it was better for the overall group to have that interaction and to make sure everyone was in the same place. So that, you know, these mastery players can find another activity, and we have those specific lessons and those specific competitions for them. But everything doesn't have to be for everyone. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Nyvein. We can go to the next one.
No worries. You're on the next one. Anyway, so.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, to your earlier point, somebody confirmed in the chat, the side conversations can be a real turnoff during the populace meetings. And that was exactly what we noticed as well. So making sure to have that agenda and being willing to redirect people is important. All right. How do we move people from following to endorsing? So following are those people that, okay, now I'm hooked in with what this organization is doing. I'm aware of the activities that are going on. Maybe I'm coming out to one or two events casually. How do we move people to the next level, endorsing the organization, which is kind of where they are, those, what we might consider those new participants, those regular new participants. First, ask for people to do things. This one is a little counterintuitive because a lot of people don't want to feel pushy. They want to ask people to, you know, they want volunteers. Generally speaking, people don't volunteer for things unless they're the kind of person who volunteers for everything. And considering how frequently in the SCA we have people volunteering for way too much, getting burnt out and leaving, it's really important that we recognize that asking for volunteers is not a sustainable method of getting people to do things. Period. So instead, ask for specific people to do specific things. Have kind of low stakes jobs for people to do during your activities and during your events. If you have a day shade or canvas that you put up at an event, that should be something that those newer folks, those followers, you are having them come with you. You're saying, hey, you come with me. We're going to go put up the day shade for our group. I'm going to show you how to do it. Setting up the day board. Hey, can you help me with this table? Requesting field space. Helping to bring common items. Hey, we're going to need a table for our day board at this event. Do you have a folding table? Can you please bring it? You personally, not can anyone bring it. Can you bring it? Even toting and day of tasks. We are refilling our water butt. The water is right over there. Can you and this person go refill the water butt? Not, again, can anyone refill this water butt? Can you do it? noticing those people that are capable of the job, are interested for the job, that's going to come with time. But it's really, really important because you're indicating to that person, you are an active participant. I want you to be an active participant. And you're explicitly teaching them, this is how we participate.
And I want to jump
Yeah,
in there. Sorry. I want to jump in there and give an example also because we have a member who has physical disabilities. And one of the things that happens occasionally at events is that she'll show up and she'll participate, and everybody else gets asked to do these jobs, right? Getting water, helping set up the tent. And it is not a job that she is capable of doing. And so I noticed this at one event and I said, oh, hey, you know what is a really good job for someone who can do seated? Coiling up the ropes from our day shade. Somebody needs to do it so they don't all go in the bag in this tangled lump and mess. And I said, hey, individual, would you mind coiling these ropes and sticking them in the bag? That'd be super helpful. While everybody else is taking down the tent and doing the other jobs that require carrying things, she then had a job to do. And she actually thanked me later because what that does is it makes her feel more part of the group. She is participating, she is contributing, she's not just showing up. And finding those things that everyone can do and noticing, again, like Ishmael said, what people can and cannot do, but then asking based on their abilities is important.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what we're talking about in these last 2 hours, or in these, the next hour, is largely having that keen vision for knowing your members and knowing their preferences, knowing what they're like. There's a lot of study involved in kind of knowing who your people are. So giving newcomers belt favors with your group's populace badge. This is a great way to kind of ritualize becoming part of the group. You're not just coming to this kind of random thing to check it out. Here you are. This belt favor is yours. It's got our populace badge on it. When you wear it and we all wear it, you are part of the group. Nyvein gives an example later on of like color wars and other kinds of jerseys. We do team colors as humans. It's something that we do. Display heraldry at events to create like a home zone. In our day shade, we make sure that there's always a banner flying with our heraldry. It's something that we try to wear whenever we can. It's something we try to put up whenever we can. We'll decorate our day shade with green and white, our Shire's colors. And all of that goes a long way towards making it obvious to those people who are trying to get into your organization. This is us. This is us here. And similarly, encourage wearing those group colors at special events. I know that we've had a couple of green and white events where we say to our populace, hey, we're all going to Battle on the Bay. If you've got anything green or you've got anything white, let's wear it, and we'll try to take like a group photo all wearing green and white. I know a couple other groups do things like that. It is a great way to make people feel like they're part of a coherent group. At this point, we do want to offer a key reminder. As we start talking about moving people up this pyramid, you are not going to keep everyone. Everybody who is in this audience right now, at some point, you're going to be trying to do all the right things, and somebody is going to fall out of participation in your group. That is okay. You cannot have 100% success rate with this. Everyone is different. Everyone's lives takes different trajectories. So please stick to following the good practice, and you're going to have good results. Don't let those setbacks make you feel like, oh, well, this doesn't work.
And it's important to note, sorry for that. It's important to note also that the SCA is not for every single individual, right? Not everyone wants to be a participant, wants to be a member of the SCA. This area where they come to their first event, they really start looking at the wider organization, is one of the most frequent zones where you lose people because they'll come check it out, they'll have good or bad experiences, and then they'll opt either to jump in more or that, hey, I'm kind of busy in my life, maybe this isn't something that I want to do. And it's important to note that the SCA is not necessarily for everyone, that there are a whole lot of activities in the world that people want to be doing, and that's okay. And this is one of those areas where you are more likely to lose people. But that is also why we give newcomers felt favors at their first event. Not so much at a practice, but when they start jumping in a little bit more, you say, hey, when you come to this larger activity with wider population, with other groups around, here's where you really want to feel tagged in to your home group so you feel like you have a home base.
Yep.
So 2 different comments there. All right.
Yeah. The lesson to take away here is that most people want to participate, but they need to be invited. If I don't think that I can say it enough, that one of our most common habits in general is to ask for volunteers. And if there's anything you're taking away from this slide, it is do not ask for volunteers. Ask individual people to volunteer, and you're going to have a much more diverse volunteer base. You're going to have much more successful group coordination, a much healthier group overall. All right. Somebody makes a great point in the chat. Like neurodivergent folks oftentimes need to be explicitly asked. A lot of the kind of socially unspoken norms that maybe neurotypical people build with each other, you can just ask this person to do something and they will super appreciate your clarity. So dive in. And if there's any questions that are coming up or comments along the way, just type them in the chat. So how do we move people from endorsing up to contributing? Contributing members are those people who are, they know how to go to an event, they're participating in various activities at those events. These may be people who are starting to maybe have some achievement in the SCA, they might be receiving an award, those kinds of things. So what do we need to know about people who are going to be retained at this level of participation? First, people need to feel that their efforts are noticed. We would like to encourage and also submit frequent award recommendations. This is something that is really important. I know that we've spoken with Royals in the past who have said, like, I've received a total of 15 new award recommendations over the course of my entire reign, stuff like that. There are 2,500 people in Atlantia. So if there are 15 new recommendations, I think that we might be having a recommendation problem. And this is, made worse by any of you who are in polling orders and read recommendations or read commentary will often hear things like, I can't believe that they don't already have this award, or I didn't realize they didn't already have this award. That is the direct result of just far too infrequent award recommendations. So encourage people to do it. When your group gets back from an event, put it out on your social media, put it out on your e-list. Hey, what happened at this event? Did you see one of your neighbors do something really cool? Write them in. Similarly, at this level, to the comment about needing to be asked and something like that, are explicit versus implicit social norms. So it's going to take a moment to talk about this one because it is a little fuzzy. Explicit social norms are the things that you say explicitly to other people in your group about how your group operates. This involves things like correcting people if they do something that they are not supposed to do. And in fact, what we're going to recommend, Nyvein and I, is that there must be actions in your group that are not okay. The SCA in general can sometimes have that kind of that kind of radical inclusion fallacy, where we really want to be inclusive of every particular kind of behavior. But norms are getting created whether you are explicit about them or not. So it's really important that you are explicit about them. Some really easy examples that have come up already in this presentation. Things like not interrupting or having side conversation during the business portion of a populace meeting. That is a great opportunity to just offer a correction. If somebody is talking while an officer is giving a report or having like a side conversation, you can turn to them and say like, hey, not now. It's going to be okay. You can do that. And it's going to make a huge impact on your overall group. So offer those polite corrections if people misstep. Things like bad mouthing award recognition or bad mouthing a particular activity, right? If you hear somebody say, that person is like just a stick jock, you can be like, hey, we don't really like bad mouth, anybody's activities here. Like anything that people want to do in the SCA is a cool activity to do. Those are the explicit social norms. And if you're not setting those explicit social norms, implicit ones are being set already. Social groups have norms, and if you don't know what yours are, then they're probably being set implicitly against your will, unknown to you. So a couple things we want to ask you to think about. What are the traits that you are encouraging when new members join your social circle? Ask yourself, what kinds of behaviors do we reward in our group? Do we reward altruism, or do we reward like hoarding of knowledge, right? Do we reward taking a break, or do we reward burning people out? Socially, I mean to say, not with like an award or like a fanfare. I mean like just the kinds of people the things that we praise, the things that we hold up. Are we praising only one type of player? Maybe we notice that in our social group, we really have a lot of admiration for people who are hardcore immersion players. And so our social players are kind of learning implicitly that this group maybe is not for them. Because that is kind of what people learn, right? You're telling new people who join your social group how we do things here. And one of the most important ways to maintain retention is to make sure that the individual in question can imagine themselves in that group, that they see themselves in this group. This comes up all the time in representation and kind of media analysis, that like people want to see themselves reflected in media, right, that they see. Different kinds of identities, different kinds of backgrounds, and that kind of thing. It's the same thing here. With your implicit and explicit social norms, you have the opportunity to tell your new folks, this is how we do things here. And we think that you're going to find that more and more people want to stay if you make sure that they know where they fit into the group. I want to offer one specific example of something that we experienced, and then we'll get to the lesson. So actually, I think Nyvein, I think you were here for this event as well. This was an event that happened when I was first getting started in the SCA. I had maybe been playing for 2 years, maybe 3. And we were at an event, and it was on, as some of you may know, like a lot of events kind of happen on somebody's personal property if they own like a bunch of land. So the event was great. We all had a great time. The event had ended, but it was a camping event. So there were some people who were camping over that night in order to leave the next morning. Most people had left, and there was a small group of 5 or 6 friends like sitting around a fire. And there were probably 16, maybe 24 people who were still camping on site that night. And so this was like the kind of central campfire of the site. And it was very much like, this is kind of the social space. Well, those 5 or 6 people who were already friends, they had a set of implicit social norms that they were displaying for everybody else who was camping, which is we like the way that you converse in our group is by sharing like no shit there I was stories, and kind of competing to one up each other with your storytelling. The way that this group works is that this group is for people who have been in the SCA for a long time, and kind of we all share a social network, so they'll be referencing in jokes or referencing, oh, you know, so-and-so from wherever. And kind of the experience that I would describe is I was watching as individuals who were still camping tried to reach the social circle and then found themselves like bounced out by the implicit social norms of that space. People might arrive, they would sit for a couple minutes by the fire to kind of warm themselves. They would quickly get an idea about what was going on there and seeing kind of this is how you do things at this social space. And then they left. And so at the end of it, I'm watching over the course of like an hour and a half as, 6 or 7 different people arrive at this campfire and then get up and leave again quickly. And so I think that's a great example that like just this social group had its own implicit norms about how those people spoke to each other, about how those people interacted with each other, and their social norms dominated that space. And so their norms did not include making open conversations for other kinds of people, asking questions of people who they didn't know, or anything like that. So yeah, I guess the point here is that those kinds of things can happen unless each of you start to think, what are the norms that govern our social interactions? And that's going to bring us to the lesson for this slide, which is contributors at this level, they don't actually have to ask too much. They know where to fit in. They know what activities they're doing. They know how they can contribute. They have some social connections, and that's really what we want to do is get those people to that place.
So moving then from contributing to owning, we're bumping our way up the top of the pyramid. Owners are those people who are emerging leaders. Maybe they are deputies, or they are your very high participation level individuals. So they are going to volunteer themselves to do jobs for events, to participate, to help out the group at kind of that higher, more interaction level. So they're the person who is almost always going to volunteer to run the A&S activities at an event. Or there's someone who stepped up to be the rapier marshal, or the night marshal for your chapter. Or there's someone who has shown interest in being deputy to an officer, whether or not there is a space available for them yet. So this is something where you want to encourage that kind of budding leadership, and you want to give them a path to continue to move up on that participation pyramid there. One of the things that is really important in this sphere is to encourage and model cheering for each other across disciplines. So you might have somebody who is a very strong A&S person, and that is what they do. They have maybe their particular craft that they have gotten really good at and that they are participating in all of the time. And they are unlikely to look around and participate in fighting events. But you can talk about, hey, we're all going to Crown to support the individual in our group who will be fighting in Crown that day. Or Crown tends to be an easy one. Maybe you're going to a large rapier competition, and you say, all right, folks, we're all going to band together as a group, and we're going to go and cheer for our members who are participating in this rapier competition, which does not tend to get as many sideline audience members cheering for the people who are participating. And if you encourage that A&S person, you can say, oh, maybe we want to give that our rapier fighter, if you just have, a few people or just like one super high level person, can we give them a special favor to wear during that competition? Giving ways for people to participate and cheer for each other across disciplines means that folks are now becoming friends across a group in different ways, and that you don't have that siloing happening in your group where you're like, oh, these are the rapier fighters, these are the A&S people, these are the armored fighters, these are the archers, they're all the way over there in another field, right? We don't even talk about them. And instead, if everybody goes to that archery event and you're cheering for your archers, then you feel that group cohesion. And group cohesion is really important to create that home base and to encourage folks who want to move up that leadership role. Because as you're moving up that leadership role, you want leaders to be a leader for the entire group than you do for want a leader to only focus on their specialty. I see someone saying in the chat they have more trouble getting the fighters to participate in non-martial activities. That also happens. It kind of varies from region to region which activities are the ones that like don't participate in other places. But this is something that you can do the other way around too. You can have an ANS day, say, and you have everybody making belt favors for your entire group. And you can specifically go to, rapier and armored fighters and say, hey, we want to be able to give these favors out to our new fighters. Also, this is going to be a really easy craft, right? Because in a lot of cases, fighters are really worried that they can't do the thing. Oh, I'm not artistic. Oh, I can't do that. I don't have those skills. Give them an easy in and say, hey, will you come participate in this smaller activity? And then they meet those people, and then you can encourage them to go to a larger event to support those friends, right? Who they already know. Now they're friends with those individuals. And having this group cohesion is one of the things that leads to team pride. So team pride results in group confidence and a growth-centered mindset. And things that lead to team pride is, again, cheering across disciplines. It's having those belt favors. It is often having group practices where you have ANS and fighting in the same space so people can actually move between activities more easily. And colors and heraldry all lead to team pride and having a really good mindset of we are all in this together. We are here as a unit. We are a team, like a sports team. We are working together, even though we all have different roles, right? So a football team is going to have different players who play in different ways, but they are all working together as a singular team. And it's important to note that having team pride does not negate having friends in other chapters or supporting other chapters in Kingdom events. That you're not fighting against your neighboring barony, you are working with them in the larger mindset of your kingdom as a whole. For example, Penzic opening ceremonies. You have folks walking in as a kingdom, processing in as a kingdom for Penzic opening ceremonies, but within each kingdom, you have your individual chapters lining up for their own group under that kingdom banner. And that is a good example of having team pride at multiple levels and in multiple ways. That team pride is not exclusive. It can look that way sometimes to outsiders because you have such a strong group cohesion going on, but it is not by definition an exclusive practice, and it should not be, because if it is, then you are not letting new members in. It has to be open in order to keep your group healthy and growing. And one thing in this contributing to owning level is they're the journeyman players of our game. And these journeymen can teach new people how we do things here. As you are asking for volunteers, you can say, hey, person who is at this intermediate level, we have this newcomer. And now you're giving your newcomer a buddy, like we were talking about earlier on. We have this newcomer. Would you mind helping show them around for the first few events? So you're giving this journeyman a mini leadership position, and you're creating those connections between group members. And along with that, we want to encourage to deputize early and often. So you want to make sure that if an officer can't do their job for whatever reason, that you have backup. You want that bench filled. And one of the best ways to do that is to have deputies, to have multiple deputies per position. And sometimes the more deputies you have, the easier it is to get more people wanting to sign up, because one of the fears is that someone will be doing a job for their volunteer organization and that they don't want to put in 40 hours a week for their volunteer organization. So if you have deputies, it means the officers don't have to work as hard. And if you have multiple deputies, that means they can all help each other. So our lesson number 8 for this whole slide is that emerging leaders need a place to practice leading. Give them opportunities to be that emerging leader.
All right. So we're on to our the top of the pyramid here. How do those emerging leaders become actual leaders? And as we mentioned earlier, this is going to be a very small group of people. um, naturally. This is not going to be the majority of your members. It really shouldn't be. But what we want to see ideally is people moving up the pyramid, participating as a leader for their portion of time, and then maybe dropping back down to owning, or even dropping back down to contributing as they're taking that break, right? People are going to go up and then back down the pyramid. And it's really important that you see people on their way up as well as people taking a break. Um, so, how do we encourage people to become those real leaders in your local group? The first thing that we recommend is treating champions and officers in your group as cheerleaders for the entire discipline. This is something that I'm sure is pretty intuitive for most of you here. If your group is a barony and has like baronial champions for arts and sciences, for armored fighting, for archery, thrown weapons, etc., bardic, creating a culture, creating that explicit social norm that your job as a champion is to be a cheerleader for the entire community goes a long way towards helping that emerging leader become an actual leader in their activity. And that's something that you can really change over the course of just one or two terms as a champion by saying these are the behaviors that a champion does, and that will have a kind of long-term effect of changing the social norm, changing the culture around what champions and officers do. Something that our local group does really, really well, I would offer every prop on the planet to our Minister of Arts and Sciences, who has a team of 3 deputies. They are the Ministry of Arts and Sciences in our local group. And she is a leader in that field. Because she is delegating to these other people, she is cheering for these classes and organizing to make sure that we have lots and lots of different activities happening every single week, all year. And she really is embodying that kind of social norm. And now whoever comes after her as a Minister of Arts and Sciences, the norm has been created. This is how this officer operates. And you'll have that kind of inertia. Give officers actual authority over their discipline. This is something that some groups may be doing better than others, so we want to make sure to indicate that, like, for example, your Knight Marshal is responsible for organizing the martial arts practices that are happening in your local group and making sure that they are safe, and making sure that they have marshals. And so one thing that is super useful to do is encourage that Knight Marshal to take that responsibility. Hey, it sounds like there's some interest in armored fighting. We don't currently have an armored fighting marshal that can like be there for the practice. I think it would be a great opportunity if you could find somebody from a neighboring group who might be interested in coming out and helping train our folks. And let them solve some problems on their own as well. Oftentimes, we can really want to be problem solvers. When somebody indicates a problem to us, we want to give them a solution. But one of the ways that you build capacity for your leaders is by letting them solve some problems on their own. So one easy example I can offer is loner gear is a pretty common thing that is oftentimes the responsibility of a Knight Marshal, again, or gold key for your chatelaines. It can be really tempting to try to make everything as like if you're the seneschal of a group, right? Like both Nyvein and I were, to make that your specific problem. Like I have got to be the one who finds gold key. But saying to your chatelaine, hey, I noticed that gold key is one of the things that is weakest right now. We don't have enough loaning garb for our new people. I would love if you made one of your objectives during this term to find ways to make that happen. You know, maybe try talking to the arts and sciences person or finding somebody who can solve that problem. It's going to go a really long way towards making your officers have more capacity for future potential problems, as well as make the job easier on the overall seneschal or baronage, as the case may be. And finally, transition your experienced people into mentorship roles on purpose. Do not wait for them to burn out before you try to find their replacement. There's a couple things that we've done that make that happen. Uh, yeah, sometimes a leader resists taking a break is a comment in the chat, and that is exactly the case. People who are leaders do resist oftentimes taking breaks. There's a couple ways you can encourage them to do that because it's healthier for them, it's healthier for the overall group. One way is like more explicit than the other. In the Shire of Roxbury Mill, our bylaws include term limits. Every officer position can only be maintained for 2 terms, and then that individual has to have at least a 6-month break where they do not have any officer roles. So that is the most explicit method by which you can encourage your people to take breaks. Make it so they do not have another choice. According to our bylaws,
where they do not where they do not have that officer role.
That officer position.
That officer.
Yeah.
So they cannot just keep continuing that. If they do not have so if an officer reaches their term limit, then they must step down from that officer role, excepting for the required positions, right? You have a couple of required positions.
Yeah.
And that officer role can remain empty for a certain amount of time because that gives the opportunity for folks who might not have volunteered because somebody was already in that role. Now that gives them the opportunity to jump in.
Less explicitly than that, social power is real power, which is our side note here. If you and 2 other people become officers, or you and 1 other person become officers, and then establish a social norm of stepping down after a term or 2, and explicitly finding, encouraging, training, and ultimately allowing your replacement to take your place. Over the course of a couple of years, that like entrenched leader is going to start to feel some of that social pressure, that like the thing that most people are doing is training their replacements, being really obvious and positive about it. And you might start to see that they say, okay, I guess that is something that everyone is doing. And so I guess that's something I might need to do.
And you can also go up to individuals who are more likely to volunteer for a new role, which is actually something that we have done before. Is I actually had to talk to an individual who volunteers for everything. He had just stepped down from about 6 years of being the night marshal. This is before we had term limits in our bylaws. And he immediately went to volunteer to be one of the other jobs. I forget exactly which one now. He immediately went to volunteer to be a new officer. And I said, hey, let's wait for other volunteers. You have just worked really hard for us for quite a while. You've done a really good job, but you deserve a break. You deserve some time off. And saying that explicitly, some people might argue like, oh, no, it's fine. You say, I know it's fine, but you deserve this break. And that is a way to also encourage breaks between officer roles. You can just say, you deserve time off. We're not pushing you out. I expect that you will want to, volunteer again later, but make sure you take time to keep yourself healthy and keep yourself playing in the way that really is good for you.
Yeah.
And you can just explicitly say that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think something that's come up a bunch of times over the last 2 hours is how often you or whoever is in charge of your group may need to have that kind of courageous conversation with another member. Things that oftentimes go unsaid that we wish would happen will not happen unless you are willing to say it to that person. So, we are friends with that person that Nyvein was mentioning. And so I can use my friendship to both care for my friend and also care for the health of the overall group. You are my friend. I want you to have a break, like not as Ishmael, but as like Michael, right? So I'm taking off the persona hat, like as Michael, like modern guy, I want you to have a break in this volunteer organization. Okay, and then imaginary hat back on. So yeah, encourage those breaks as best as you can. I do want to talk about entrenched culture because it comes up a lot, and then we'll do our lesson, and we're almost through. So we frequently get questions when we teach this class about entrenched cultures. My local group has an entrenched culture of kind of circling the wagons and being very much about insiders. Maybe we're not really welcoming to new people yet, or our culture is entrenched about people being volunteers until they kind of martyr themselves and burn out. What do I do? How do I change that culture? And the thing that we really want to note at the end of the day is that positive social groups become magnets for new people, and that disarms entrenched toxicity. Social power is real power. If there is somebody who is the most powerful person in our group, with whatever kinds of awards you can imagine, if they are socially outnumbered by the implicit or explicit social norms of your local group, it does not matter. That social power is going to become the norm for your group. So doing these things yourself and finding those 2 or 3 allies who are going to help you with these positive behaviors is really going to help. So the lesson here is make space at the top for change. You can think about this metaphor as kind of like the person who summits the peak, and then they turn around and immediately start reaching down their hand to help the next person get up there with them. That's really what we want to see at this level. People who sit at the top and say, I'm the leader, I'm doing this thing, their group is very brittle, very fragile. And if anything happens to them, the group falls apart. Yeah, so a couple of things in the chat. First, we're a small shire of multiple towns with a 5-hour wide radius scattered through several valleys, so we don't have much of a population. This is the other thing that comes up all the time. Nyvein, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, about like a lot of the SCA, our groups are over enormous geographical territory. We are a single county. So what do you recommend there?
Yeah, so different groups are going to look different, right? So if you have a very wide geographic range for your shire, then realistically, you might not be able to do things in the same way or do as much of things for your group as maybe we can do in a higher population density area. But that makes it especially important to keep an active website and an active social media sphere so people can be interacting even if they cannot physically make it to all of your activities. Another thing that is important in something where you have a wide geographic range is to ensure that not all of your activities are happening in the same exact location all of the time, right? So if you always have activities on one end of your geographic range and the people on the far end are going to have a much harder time making it to that activity. Seeing how you can spread those activities around in that geographic space makes it a lot easier for more people to go to different activities and just and then keeping that in mind over time and maybe having a couple special, maybe you have your regular practice in one space, but you'll have monthly special practices in other spaces around, and seeing if you can reach out to those people who are scattered more farther away and talk to them and say, oh, we're doing this thing that I think you would really like. Do you have time to make it to something? Again, that one-on-one conversation, those reaching out to people individually is really going to help you and be a benefit to keeping your group together, even when it's scattered across a lot of space. Was that a
That's that. Yeah, there was
okay.
a question about having bylaws, and that like some kingdoms, most local groups don't maintain bylaws, but use the kingdom law. And I made the point that there isn't anything excluding a group from having bylaws as long as they're not less restrictive than kingdom law, and they need to be approved by your kingdom seneschal. So any group that wants to could absolutely say, we would like to write some bylaws for the way our group is governed. It's pretty normal for local chapters and other volunteer orgs to have local bylaws. They can't contradict anything higher than them. So it would be something you'd want to coordinate with your kingdom or regional seneschal.
There was actually no requirement for us to have bylaws either.
No.
We just decided that it would be a good thing. So we made them. I think we should move on to our conclusion slide and then keep answering questions,
Yep.
since we are low on our timing. And our conclusion is basically pulling together everything that we have said across the whole presentation, that by combining strong retention practices and strong recruitment practices, this leads to a local group that can balance local households, host strong events, make stronger kingdoms, and weather setbacks and external pressures like a pandemic. I think that households point, though, is especially important to bring up, that we do have members who are in households in our Shire. This does not detract from our Shire. It does not detract from our team pride. Again, that team pride thing is not a singular item, that those individuals have team pride both for the households that they are part of and for our Shire as a group. And we have individuals who are in different households. We don't just have one household happening in our Shire. So we have this diverse group that is then also has connections across the kingdom in various ways. And what that means is that our group is strong and is healthy and is thriving. It's not exclusionary. It is an inclusion of all the different ways you can play in the SDA while still being a healthy unit on its own. And I'm going to move to our last slide. So if you would like to have our email addresses for any reason, that is up on our slide. We have our lovely scattering of pictures here. And we can go to answering questions in the last few minutes that we've got.
I know the recording is scheduled to end in a couple minutes. I would point out for purposes of that a couple things on this slide that are working super well that we would recommend you try is you might see a bunch of Shire folk on this slide that have Shire swag. We've got t-shirts and tank tops and hoodies. Teespring is a great method to make this happen. Anybody you can find with some graphic design experience can make that Teespring storefront. I think it's just called spring.com now, actually.
Updated.
And you can set your price point. It was an exceptionally successful fundraiser for us, and a great way to build that team pride and build that team color, even when you're not in garb. So highly recommended. And then finally, that kind of bottom left picture was a meetup that our group did at the Renaissance Fair, the Maryland Renaissance Fair here. So we want to tell, we're doing a lot of the things that we're trying to recommend. Can you share the link for the swag place? Yeah, Nyvein, do you think you can?
Yeah, I'll pull that up.
The link in,
and an important thing about Teespring is that it's not a one and done type of fundraiser. That some t-shirt fundraisers tend to be one and done. If you don't catch it, sorry, you're out, and that is a detriment for newer folks coming in. But those not Teespring, and there are other places like it also where you can keep that storefront up. I think Redbubble also is very similar. Means that if folks come in, they can buy that sweatshirt or that t-shirt, and they don't have to worry about having missed the fundraiser or you having to run it over again.
Mm-hmm.